Good evening. This tutorial will show you how to do the same type of work in StatCrunch that the earlier video did, but instead of relying on the internet and StatCrunch, how to use a TI-83 or TI-84 calculator to do the same type of work. It's the same data set on sleeping drugs, and we want to see which one does better than the other, and we'll be looking at both paired tests and two sample tests. The good news is if you have the 83, this will look exactly like what you'll see on your own. If you have an 84, it will also look almost exactly like what you have on your own. Now if you have a TI-89, the Titanium Edition does have a Flash application called Stat List Editor, and it will behave very much in the same way that I will show you with the 83. If you have one of the older 89s, you'll have to download that app from the TI website. But to start off with, let's go with the 83 here. So I've turned on the calculator, the emulator here, and let's start entering the data set. Now there are two different ways to enter the data set into these calculators, at least two ways that I like. One way is to do this from the home screen. So by clicking the second button and the parenthesis, that's not the right one, second parenthesis, we get this curly bracket, and this is going to allow us to enter a list. So if I start typing in the values for drug 1, separating each by a comma, I will eventually get the whole data set in here. This is a little bit time consuming on the computer because this is an emulator, so I have to mouse over and click every single button, and it appears that it's going to take 2 or 3 clicks, so I will pause the video and come back after I finish this list. Alright, now that we have the list entered, at least the data, we want to close the list and then store it. And we do this by hitting the second button and the right parenthesis, and we get the curly bracket, store key, second, and I want to store this into list 1, which is the list right above the 1 key, and hit enter. Now the advantage of this is that I can recall the information anytime I need. I have this vector saved. And this is one way to store the information. Another way to do this is under the Stat menu. So by clicking the Stat button, you see this first option is Edit. Hit Enter. You can see that list 1 is pre-populated with the values that we should see from here. There's 0.7, the -1.6, the -2. You can also enter values through here, which may be a little bit easier. You type in the value, hit Enter, and it populates a list. And it looks like the emulator is doing a little bit better here, but again, I will pause this video, populate the list, and be back in a minute. Alright, thank you for that little digression. Of course, it was almost no time at all in the edited video, but it took me a moment to get that typed in. So I've got these two lists. List 1 is drug 1, list 2 is drug 2, and I have these saved. I want to exit the editor and come back to the home screen, clear it out, and of course we're interested in some of the sample statistics. So there's a bunch of ways you can do this. There's a bunch of list operations. So if you hit second and the stat key, we'll get to the list options. If we go over to the math menu, we can get a lot of different values, such as the mean. Bring that onto the home screen by clicking enter, type in the list, close the bracket, hit enter. There's the mean of list 1. If I want to get the mean for list 2, I can do the same thing. I'm actually going to just recall that entry, back arrow over, and get list 2. So it's very easy to get these means and standard deviations. If I want to get the mean for the difference, and the convention that was used in the other video was drug 2 minus drug 1, I will do the same thing here, and I can take the mean of list 2 minus list 1, and I get 1.58. Another way to do this, which may actually benefit us in the moment here, is I want to save these differences for use later. So I'm going to put on the home screen list 1 minus list 2 minus list 1, and I want to store this difference as list 3, And sure enough, here it is. Here are all the differences. And if I do the mean for list 3, we should get the same answer as before. There we go. So that's a quick way to do the means, get some of those values. If you're looking for the standard deviation or the variance, we can get these as well. Standard deviation is here, variance is here. Now, that's a lot of work to do to get a couple different things. Perhaps we'd like to get all the information all at once, and we can do that very easily from the Stat menu. So we're clicking the Stat button, arrow over once to the Calc menu, and we see these 1var stats, 2var stats, and I'm interested in one variable statistics right now. Just what is a mean, variance, standard deviation from one variable. So if I enter here, I get 1var stats placed on the home screen, and then I can tell the calculator which list to look at. I want it to look at list 1. And it returns x bar, the average, sum of the x's squared, sx. This is the sample standard deviation. This value right here is the one you're interested in. This value, the sigma x, this is a different estimator for variance, or in this case standard deviation. Do not use this one for our work. We want to use sx. If you arrow down through these options, you'll find the min, quartiles, median, third quartile, max. There's a lot of information that's given here, so this is quite handy. If we want to get the stats for the difference, this is where that list 3 is going to come in handy. 1var stats, list 3. Here's my mean difference, and here's a standard deviation in the differences. So that's how we can get some of the sample statistics. If I want to do a paired test or a confidence interval, I'm going to go to the Stat menu, come all the way over to Tests, and there's a whole bunch of different things. Let's say I want to do a t-test. That's for one population. I could do 2-sample z-test, a 2-sample t-test. One proportion z, 2 proportion z. As we arrow down, we have our intervals, and it goes even to chi-square tests, f-tests, linear regression tests, and analysis of variance. So for the time being, let's look at a paired test. And the way the TI calculators are set up is that anytime we have 2 samples, whether it's paired or a true 2-sample test, we're going to go to this option here, the 2-sample t-test. Click enter, and we have a couple ways of doing this. We can use either this one that's blacked out right now, that should be data, and that's the one we want highlighted. On your machine, this should be blinking. And I've got 2 different lists, list 1 and list 2, and the convention that was used earlier was that drug 2 was being used as the first element. I'm not going to mess with this right now, but you can easily change it. Leave the frequencies as 1. You don't need to worry about what those are right now. But as you arrow down, you can pick out your different hypotheses. And in this case, I'm interested to see that drug 2, I gain more sleeping time than I do from drug 1. So I want to see that drug 2, or mu2, is larger than mu1. So from these 3 options, I want this middle one. Click enter, highlight it. Pooled variance, we will have the default as no. And we have 2 options, draw or calculate. Pick the calculate one. And turns out that this is just for a 2-sample t-test. I thought it had the paired option. That might be another version of the ROM, but in this version it's only for a 2-sample test. So here is our 2-sample test. You have our t statistic, which is our test statistic, the p-value, the degrees of freedom, and some summary statistics as well. So that's all there. If you want to do the paired test, remember that in lecture we've talked how the paired test simplifies down to a 1-sample test for the difference. So again, I'm going to input data. I'm going to test against 0 just for the time being. And my differences are in list 3. So I've changed the list from list 1 to list 3 where my data is actually stored. And I'm just going to do a 2-tailed test to see if it's different from 0. Right? And I'm going to calculate. And it thinks real quick. It spits out the answer. Here's a t statistic, the p-value, and some more summary statistics. So this is how you can do those different tests in the TI calculators. If you have any questions, please let me know on those. Let me show you the confidence intervals before I close this up. So if you come down to a T interval, this would be for the differences again for a paired test. Confidence level, I'm going to input through data. Think, and here is our 95% confidence interval for the difference between drug 2 and drug 1. I know it's the paired test because of how I've set it up. If you want to do the 2 sample intervals, we have to click down a little bit further. 2 sample T interval, so option 10, 0 here. Again, I'm inputting data. List 1 and list 2 is where I have drug 1 and drug 2. Frequency should be 1 apiece. And this time around, I want to make a 98% confidence interval, just because I can. Pooled, our default is no. Hopefully your calculator is also set on no. Highlight calculate, which is the very last option here. Click enter. Thinking. And we have our interval for a 98% confidence interval for the difference in drug 2 versus drug 1. And based on this, there's no significant difference. We got our degrees of freedom, the interval itself, and some summary statistics that you can arrow through and read all that good information. So what I would suggest you do if you're going to this video first, hopefully it helped you, but please look at the video on how to do this in StatCrunch, because I give a little bit more of an explanation on what we're doing and the relationship between them. But this is how you can do the same work with your handheld device. Again, if you have a TI-89, the work is going to be very similar. You just have to go through the Flash apps, and it will give you an interface very similar to the one that's on the 83 or the 84. And if you have questions about that, feel free to send me an email or come talk to me.